Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So in the intro montage of this episode, I did a bunch of titanium fastener anodizing. And I've replaced the majority of the fasteners that I was going to on the SC's engine. So we can see all along the coil pack assembly now has purple fasteners. The fuel rail has purple fasteners. And I also replaced the fasteners for the distributor block-off cap. And I have a number of other ones to go, but in order for those to be installed, I need to get the front of the engine back together. All of the components that I've been waiting on to put the front of the SC's engine back together are now here. And that is this triplet of parts right here. So I have a new timing belt tensioner. I have a Powerhouse Racing steel billet timing belt tensioner bracket and a new bearing. And I have an Accelerated Performance timing belt tensioner bracket stud kit. So all of these parts are ones that I advocate to include or to replace anytime you have the front of the engine apart or you're doing any timing belt style service. The factory cast aluminum timing belt tensioner brackets, which my index finger is on right here, those are known to be weak and they can break at higher RPMs and exactly at the time when you don't want them to break. And if that breaks and the timing belt loses tension, valves meet pistons, catastrophic failure ensues, and it's a really bad day and a bad deal. So this billet bracket is just cheap insurance, essentially. With it being a piece of billet steel, it's very, very unlikely that this will break. And they also have a nice bushing in here, so this piece can rock back and forth as it needs to without really any worry of it binding up or getting stuck or anything like that. And the accelerated timing belt, or we'll call it the timing stud kit, this is another piece of cheap insurance. Rather than relying on an oddly shaped bolt with some kind of questionable geometry that the factory used that could be very likely to break, especially as it's been cycled who knows how many times, swapping over to a stud makes the fastener assembly A little bit more rigid and stronger, and B, it makes it so there is no strange geometry associated with it, and you don't have to worry about breaking the stud off or anything like that. So in order to install these new parts, I first need to pull 1, 2, and 3, being the factory components here. I need to remove those in order to put the new ones in place. The first thing I've done in this order of operations to replace these timing system components is to put the engine at top dead. So you can maybe see down here, if I zoom you guys in, the red mark right above my index finger, as well as the red mark here and the red mark here. Everything is lined up, and I'm ready to pull the old stuff off. So the way that I'll generally do this is I'll remove the actual tensioner itself. That's just two 12mm head, I think they're M8 125 bolts. That will come out and allow the actual tensioner bracket to rock back. And at that point in time, it's just a simple matter of replacing what you've removed with the new components. It's time to install the accelerated timing stud kit. And this is pretty straightforward, but I'll go through it with you guys so we all know how this goes. So the stud itself has two sides. If you guys can see, there is a short side closest to my thumb, long side closest to my index finger. The short side is what goes into the oil pump, and the accelerated guys also include these two nuts, so that way you can actually tighten everything down. So I'll jam these nuts together real quick, and then we'll be good to go to install the stud. So the stud itself gets installed with a little bit of red Loctite, or red thread lock rather, which I've just applied. So you can see the red thread lock on there. And this gets torqued down to 10 pound-feet. So not a whole lot of torque, but not a whole lot of torque is necessary for this. I went ahead and I pulled the timing belt just so I can get to all this a little bit easier. But it's now time to torque this stud down. So it takes just 10 pound-feet, so not anything crazy. And I have my little 3/8 torque wrench set at 10. So let's go ahead and torque this down. Right there. That's all that it takes. So you can pull those two nuts off of there and get ready to install the bracket. One thing that you definitely do not want to forget is this washer right here. This sits behind the bracket and it acts as a little spacer and something for the bracket to move against. So pretty critical part. What I'm also going to do with the strange looking nut that comes with the accelerated kit is I'm going to put some anti-seize on the outside of it, and then I'm also going to put red Loctite on the threads of the stud so that way everything stays in place the way that it should. With red Loctite and anti-seize applied, it's now time to install this. So get thread started, start winding this thing down into here. This gets tightened down to 40 pound-feet of torque, and it is a 25 millimeter fastener. So I'll switch from my Wii torque wrench and go over to my nice digital one, and we'll tighten it down that way. There we go. Torque down, good to go, and this thing is still allowed to move forward and rearward, or back and forth rather, which is very important. And we are ready to put the timing belt back on. So a little note about the timing belt. You guys can see it has text on it, and this makes no difference in terms of performance or anything, but just doing things the right way, I like to make it so the text faces the correct direction so it can be read if you are looking at the front of the engine. Not that the cover will ever really be off of this thing, but just makes me feel a little bit warmer and fuzzier about this. So these timing belts can be kind of a pain sometimes to get lined up appropriately, but just work with and fiddle with it for long enough, and eventually it will go into place. All right, all of my timing marks are aligned, and for me personally, this usually takes a few attempts to get this right. I don't do engine work all that much, but at this point, it's time to pull the grenade pin. And this is a little bit anticlimactic, but there we go. The pin's out, the timing belt is tensioned, and now I need to do the spin test. And what that consists of is spinning the engine over, making sure that all of your marks line back up when everything returns to top dead. And if that is the case, then you're good to put the rest of it together. And as we round off the last little bit, there's the crank mark. Cam marks are still lined up. This baby's in time. And most importantly, we're ready to put the rest of the front of the engine together. Well, the goal for today on the SC is to get the front of the engine back together. And I've gone ahead and cleaned all of the timing covers. And everything is ready to go on the car. Right here, I wanted to make a quick note of the factory timing belt tensioner bracket. Like I said yesterday, you can see it's a cast aluminum piece, and who knows how old this is. And the fastener itself, you can see the narrower threads compared to the wider body of the bolt, and that's why I like to swap out for the stud. Right where the narrow section, the threads meet this wider section, that is a likely point of fracture, and not a good deal if you break that fastener. But we don't have to worry about that now. With the stud and everything else in place, everything's good to go. And most importantly now, it's time to put the front end together. I've reinstalled the lower timing cover, and I wanted to show this before I get started. So if I turn my light down a little bit and zoom you guys in, if you see that bit of orange on the snout of the crank, that is anti-seize. So I opted to put a bit of anti-seize on the snout of the crank just to make the balancer go on a little bit more easily. So with that in mind, the first, or I guess second order of this whole operation is to get the balancer put on. So I have the balancer here. I have my new crank bolt, and you can see that it has red Loctite on it. I've already had this on and off once before I decided to redo the timing bracket and all of that stuff. But I've honed the balancer a little bit. It should go on a little bit more easily now with that and then the anti-seize. Without me running my mouth anymore, and with the car firmly on the lift at this point in time, let's go ahead and get the balancer put on. All right, these balancers have a keyway slot in them, and the keyway is facing straight up with how everything's positioned now. And here we go. The balancer has began to be seated. So at this point, I'll take the crank bolt with some additional red Loctite and start threading it. And now I get to use my new ratchet. So I just bought this. It's a 26-inch long, half-inch drive ratchet from good old Harbor Freight. You can see it's an icon piece. And I'll use this to draw the balancer in. And this should go pretty easily. I also have the car in fifth gear with the parking brake pulled as tightly as I could get it. And we'll use the transmission in the car to hold all of this in place. And the bit of honing that I did to this balancer is allowing it to go on very easily. Once this is seated, which feels like right about there, it's time to actually torque it. So in the past, I've generally just impacted these balancers on. But with not having a great way to get an impact into the engine bay right now, I'm going to actually torque it. And the torque that these require is 239 pound-feet of torque. So there's 239. And now I can go ahead and actually tighten this down. Here we go, big pull. Here we go. Okay, so the balancer is torqued. The car didn't fall off of the lift, and now I can lower it down and continue the reassembly. first belt that I got was a little bit short, so went and got a longer one. Hopefully this is the ticket, but there's only one way to tell. We'll see here momentarily. There we go. Belt's on there. Hopefully it has enough tension. I guess we'll see once it's running. Well, this is the third attempt trying to find Goldilocks with the Serpentine belt. So the length has changed. I'm not sure exactly from where, but the length has changed between the belt that was on this car and what I have in my hands right here. So I'm hoping that third time is a charm, but we'll see here in a moment. Okay, that one's still a little bit too short, but I have other options. Let me go grab the next one. All right, fourth belt option, because if you haven't done it 4 times, have you really done it at all? 5 times or it doesn't count. This one doesn't fit. I'm apt to catch the car on fire at this point in time. Here we go. Okay. 5 times. Sounds like a lot, kind of is, but you guys have worked on cars, you know that's just the way things go sometimes. So hopefully all of these things will be driven correctly now. Belt tension feels good, everything else. So I guess now it's finally time to try to start this thing. That was a success. The belts are staying on where they need to. Nothing crazy that way. And the engine's still obviously in time, otherwise it wouldn't sound as crisp and clean as it does. But this is a success at this point in time. No crazy wobbles, no nothing. I'm pretty happy with it. Happy with the way the car looks. And moreover, ready to move on to Aristo things. Well, we have a few additional boxes and a few additional parts for the Aristo's engine build. So I guess let's go from left to right from your guys' vantage point, and let's talk about what's here. So the first box is from Neighbor Racing, and what this is a billet rear main seal housing kit. So this is a really nice piece, uses a factory rear main seal. It is O-ring sealed on the inside of it, as opposed to using RTV. Has provisioning for actually unseating this piece once it is put in place. And also came with additional O-ring stock. It came with the fasteners to fasten it down into place. And it came with a jet tag keychain as well, which is pretty cool. So the factory ones, why this is a benefit, the factory rear main seal housings, they're all mid-20s, if not 30-year-old cast aluminum at this point in time, provided you're using a used housing. And as we've discovered on this channel, cast aluminum can get brittle and fatigue over time and end up cracking. Or you could potentially have the piece warp. It can be a nightmare to seal it. It can be a nightmare to seal it with RTV and everything. And this, using an O-ring to seal it, being of billet construction, will be a stronger, more resilient piece. If and whenever I have to take the engine back apart to pull the crank out, having this billet piece in place will be a much nicer option than the factory cast piece. Next up, we have the valve springs. So if you remember in the initial engine components video, the valve springs were an outstanding item. I had initially ordered a beehive spring set that my engine builder and good friend Don at Accelerated Performance suggested that I send back and change to a different spring kit. So what I've ended up with is a 2JZ conical spring kit with titanium retainers. They're just valve springs. They're not the most exciting thing in the world to look like, or to look at rather, but if you know the GSC brand, you know the racing and performance pedigree behind the GSC name, and Greg and crew over there do a phenomenal job with their components. So the springs all look really nice, as well as the titanium retainers with all the cool little laser etching and everything on them. And these will live very happily and very helpfully in the cylinder head of the Aristo as we spin this thing and make power and all of that. So having a good set of valve springs is a must-have for a performance engine, both to withstand additional dimensions with the camshafts, whether that be lift or duration or things along those lines, and to prevent valve float and make it so you don't end up having piston to valve contact that nobody wants. A good set of valve springs is a must for a race engine or a performance engine of any kind. And last but not least, we have these two boxes right here. You can see the ARP box on top. This is a 625 plus main stud kit, and the box below is the set of billet main caps. So these main caps are from RS Garage, and if you guys have been around Supras and 2JZs for any period of time, the name Jay Marr will certainly ring a bell in your head. RS Garage is Jay's new venture into performance automotive, offering his take on a variety of different engine components, engine builds, and if you know Jay or you know of Jay, you know his name and his history kind of speaks for itself. So these mains are really, really nice looking. They are a steel billet main, so you aren't swapping over to an aluminum cap that could potentially have issues with aluminum not being quite as strong as steel in this application. These are shipped out undersized the same way as any other billet main is, and the reason for that is it allows you to align hone the mains so the crank sits perfectly with perfect clearances and perfect tolerances on all of the main journals. A cool little note on these main caps is the little squiggly drawing that you can see on there is actually a drawing that Jay's daughter did, and he's included it on these main caps. I believe he includes it on his timing belt tensioner brackets. It's a cool little familial piece that Jay likes to include on his parts, and I think it's a really cool little accent. The caps are all labeled and directed as far as which cap is which and which direction is forward. If you guys can see that right there, you can see I have the number 1 main cap in my hand, and to your left is the forward position for it. So you could put these backwards or put them in any orientation, minus the center main cap that houses the thrust washers. But you could put them in any orientation, in any order that you'd like, but obviously it makes the most sense to put them in their correct locations. So the billet mains are a huge upgrade and a must for a 2JZ that you really plan on pushing, as the factory main caps can fail. And if that fails and the crank is unsupported, you break a crankshaft, you break the entire engine, bad deal all around. The main stud kit came from RS Garage as well. They sell the billet main caps and the main studs as a kit that is very, very fairly priced in my opinion. And as we talked about in the initial engine components video, which if you haven't watched that, pause this, go back and watch it. There's a bunch of Bunch of cool parts there, and my understanding and a bit of information about each and every one of them. But if you're familiar with the ARP name and familiar with their fastener offerings, you know that the CA625 or the custom age 625 material is their premier material at this point in time. So in wanting to support Jay and in seeing that he offered his main cap set with the premier studs, it was a no-brainer to go that direction. So these studs are really nice, the threads are absolutely beautiful on them, and ARP used the best material that they could to make these as strong and resilient as possible. And I won't have any concerns or any worries about the crank spitting out the bottom of the car with these main caps and these studs in place. So at this point in time, with the addition of these 4 boxes to my stash of Aristo engine parts, I think I'm ready to go up to accelerated at this point in time to drop the parts that need to be dropped off, to bring my cylinder head back, and to get started with my portion, at least my initial portion of this engine build. We'll have some things to go over with the cylinder head, some differences between GE and GTE heads, as well as VVTI and non-VVTI heads. Some cool things to go over. If you haven't seen these different types of cylinder heads before, it's pretty interesting. The differences between them are pretty stark. But with that being said, let's go ahead and take a trip up to Toledo, go visit Don, Russ, and the whole Toledo crew, and let's get this engine build officially underway.
So you guys have heard me talk about accelerated performance and them being the machine shop that I use for all of my engine work. So why don't we take a little bit of a dive down the rabbit hole and talk about the different tooling and machinery that they have there that allows them to do the work that they do and to be an excellent machine shop. First up is the align hone. So this is the tool that is used to cut billet main caps. This is necessary because billet main caps are sent out undersized, meaning that they are tighter or have a narrower diameter than the factory main caps. And they're set up in this manner so you can specifically tailor fit the main caps to your specific engine, your specific crank, and have everything be as correct and as tightly machined as it possibly can be. The machine essentially uses a large impact connected to a mandrel with a number of different cutting shoes or cutting inserts that are attached to it that can be pushed out to achieve the specific diameter that you need to for your particular engine. There are different stone options for different types of material. Cast iron uses one specific type, while aluminum uses another specific type. Next up is the boring bar, and this machine is used to cut the rough diameter for cylinders in an engine block. The cutting head can be set to a variety of different diameters and can be centered in the bore to ensure that the bore is concentric in the way that it needs to be, and that the bore is sized at least roughly appropriately. Next is the rod hone, and this is used either to correctly size the actual ends of a connecting rod or to size a balancer hub assembly to the correct diameter. Similar to the align hone, the rod hone's cutting inserts can be pushed out to achieve the perfect diameter on whatever it is that you're trying to cut on it. Next, we have their head and block mill, and this is one of the newer pieces of tooling that they've acquired. And man, is it a beautiful piece. This tool uses a spinning cutter head that cuts the mating surface of either a block or a cylinder head to ensure that it's flat and that it has the highest likelihood of sealing that it possibly can. It has a variety of different holding fixtures and apparatus to ensure that the block or the head is held level and square to make sure the cut is done level and square as well. Next is their new cylinder hone, and this is another one of their new tooling or recent tooling acquisitions. And similar to the head and block mill, it is a beautiful, beautiful piece. Similar to the other hones, the cutting heads have inserts in them, cutting inserts, that can be pushed out to achieve whatever the specific diameter is that you need for a particular engine block. This is the machine that's responsible for the final engine block bore sizing. And in this clip, you can also see the beautiful surface finish they were able to achieve on the engine block's deck surface with the block and head mill. Next, we have their crankshaft machine, and this machine serves essentially two different purposes depending on what needs to be done with a particular crankshaft. One function of the machine is to polish a crankshaft using a large sanding belt to ensure that on either a crank journal or a rod journal there are no burrs and that it is clean and ready for a bearing to sit on it. Another portion is balancing, where these fixtures are clamped to the crankshaft to ensure that all of the weights are in the appropriate locations and that the crankshaft won't have any vibrations or otherwise strange harmonics that could compromise the engine. And last but not least, we have their cylinder head station. This can do virtually any service on a cylinder head that you could imagine, whether that be cutting seats, installing guides, anything along those lines. It's a killer machine to have for any cylinder head work. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what Accelerated's capabilities are and what exactly it is they do there in terms of engine machining and engine building. They have virtually any tool you could possibly need to put together an engine of any type, and this is the exact reason why I've gone to them for years for any of my engine machining and engine work needs. So now that we've covered that, let's go ahead and get back to the shop and let's end this video off.
With yesterday's accelerated trip in the books, the Aristo's new block and crank and the billet main set is all up with Don, so he can begin cleaning the block up and working his machining magic on it. So I hope that you guys enjoyed seeing all of the different machining tools they have there. The assortment of different machinery they have is pretty significant and pretty impressive, and they do a wonderful job with all of those tools at their disposal at Accelerated, and they do a great job with their engines. But most importantly, I brought back a very key component to the Aristo's new engine build, and it's sitting on the table right here. And what that is the Aristo's new cylinder head. So we'll go into more detail in probably next week's episode as far as what exactly this head is, the differences between different types of JZ cylinder heads, why I chose this one as opposed to other ones, so on and so forth. But for right now, I will say this is a 2JZ GE VVTi cylinder head, and it does need to be cleaned up quite a bit. You can see it's a little bit grimy and a little bit dirty, but that is no big deal. And I can clean it up and get it prettied up and everything else, and we have port work and everything else to look forward to with the beginning of the assembly and the work and everything else associated with this new engine build. But this video has ran long enough, and I think this is a good place to wrap up. So thank you guys, as always, for coming along on all of these different journeys and all of these different adventures with me. I am very, very excited for this Aristo engine build. I am elated that it's finally underway, and I can't wait to take you guys along on this entire journey with me. I also can't wait to get the SC out and do some additional driving and tuning and everything else with it, as well as working on the Mark II, working on the Mark IV. It's a Toyota smorgasbord over here, and I could not be having more fun with all of it. So from the bottom of my heart, I thank you all very much for joining me on this journey through Toyotadom, and I hope that you are enjoying your time here as well. But with all that being said, that'll be about the end of this one. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, check out the website for manifolds, for merch, for all things good that way, including my MCB collection. The collection is now complete with all of the different apparel and accessory items that I designed the collection to include. So all of those things can be found in the description below under the MCB collection link. And if you see anything there that speaks to you and that you would like to add to your collection, by all means, feel free to scoop any of it up. And if nothing there does speak to you, and nothing there is something that you would like to add to your collection, that's all right as well. Hopefully there's something in the future that does speak to you and that you would like to add to your collection. But with all of that being said, that'll be the end of this one, and I will see you guys in the next episode.